Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with my 2023 library tour. We're just going to work our way down this bookcase, so I had no complaints from anybody about reaching off camera, so that's fine. So we have some transwise books here, books that I stack on top of books, but we also have clipping. This is a piece by Alexander Chee on E.M. Forster's novel Morris, which you see what I did here. I pulled this out of, it looks like the Atlantic or something. He did just a meditation on Morris, on its interest, its historical interest, its publication history, and I knew when I saw it that I wanted to save it. I fairly like this author, and that I wanted it to live in a copy of the book. And the reason I have it start transwise here is because obviously when I did that, I couldn't be bothered to look to find my Penguin Classic of the book, and I don't have a nice hardcover edition of that book. It's kind of how I view the classics that I have, the paperback classics or the Penguin classics. I kind of view them as usually a kind of genetic backstop for whatever classic is involved, where I want the Penguin Classic because it's always going to be good. It's always going to be well done, well annotated, well presented. But I'll have it, but then for the classics I really love, I will also be on the lookout always for an interesting hardcover edition. Some interesting, maybe illustrated or old, or some interesting variation on the book. So I don't mind having two. And Morris is an example of a book that I don't. The only hardcover edition that I've ever seen at the Brattle Bookshop was the hardcover edition that was done in conjunction with the movie, the Merchant Ivory movie, that has an out-of-focus photo. Two characters riding horses in the mist. I guess it's a good callback to the movie. It's a good moment in the movie, but that's not what I want. So right now, all I have is the Penguin Classic, and it wasn't readily available, so I just stuck the review up there. Okay, then we have a great Penguin Classic. I mentioned, I think it was yesterday. They all blur together. I mentioned that some Penguin Classics are pro forma. Nothing wrong with that. They're serving schools, after all. Quite a bit of their business comes from schools. Quite a bit of them are pro forma, but some of them are special. Some of them are really special. They're, for instance, the only popular edition in English of the work in question. Or they're an editorial construction that doesn't exist anywhere else, that Penguin has just managed to get and produce on their own. Or they're an annotated version of something that is just better than any other version. Their Penguin Classic version of Magna Carta, for instance, a perfect example of that. And this is a good example too. This is the works of the Gawain poet. Big fat thing. All done in, this is edited by Ad Putter and Myra Stokes. And it's heavily annotated and just everything. I don't know why there's an awkward piece of paper here. What are you doing here? Oh, you're, okay. The pub sheet is in here. From before we were talking to each other, I'm pretty sure. Those can get a little awkward in paperback. Maybe I should get rid of that. Yeah, I should get rid of that. All right, so we have the works of the Gawain poet. Very, very interesting. How are we going to work our ergonomics here? I'll find a way. Then we have the old Penguin Classic. This is the... oh, no, this isn't the old one. This is the poet A.E. Stallings, who we've seen actual volumes of poetry from that poet, and this poet is also an active translator. This is A.E. Stallings' translation of De Rerum Natura by Lucretius, which had a boring Roman mosaic on the cover. It wasn't boring. That painting, that wall painting, was not boring when it was originally made, but it's boring now. So I fixed it up. This is an epic poem, and here Stallings really makes it come alive. An epic poem about cosmology, what would have been known as physics at the time. Not a poem that has an analog anywhere in the ancient world, so interesting in its own right there. Then we have this lovely edition. This is a translation by David Rayburn. This is a lovely edition of my favorite book, Ovid's Metamorphoses. Just beautiful. Just a beautiful thing. I have many, many editions of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and that is always a little bit ironic because when I really have a yen to go back and read a big chunk of the Metamorphoses, I never do it in English. So the fact that I have 4 or 5 different editions in English is Well, it's an exorbitance. It's an indulgence, which we all have in our libraries, right? You included. So then we have Plutarch. This is well, okay. This is the translations by Rex Warner, a great old classicist, but it has to have been heavily revised because they would never let his translation go the way it is, the way it was. But this is the Fall of the Roman Republic, a Penguin Classic volume of Plutarch that has Pompey and I believe Julius Caesar is in here. And if you're going to have a book on the Fall of the Roman Republic, you'd better have Julius Caesar in here. What are the lives? Marius, Sulla, Crassus, Pompey, Caesar, and Cicero. All with, loving Penguin annotations and all that sort of thing. I love these volumes. Penguin makes 4. They do Plutarch in 4 volumes. You already know if you watch this channel that I don't actually agree with that as a way to treat the classics. This particular classic is always carved up like butcher's meat, and it shouldn't be. It wasn't written to be done that way. It wasn't. And also, I might add, I don't know how much of an opportunity or how willingness you're going to have to do this, but it's a better read when you read it the way the author wrote it, as opposed to let's find the names that are famous 2,000 years ago. The names that have managed to stay famous. Let's find those and just give you those in one volume without anything else. Those are the Transwise books. Then we'll just power on here. Oh well, okay, great. This is the Penguin Classic Pride and Prejudice. Lovely edition there. Can't go wrong with Lawrence painting. Then we have the Selected Writings of William Hazlitt. This is lots and lots of criticism. There are familiar essays in here, but there's lots and lots of criticism as well. Embryonic literary criticism that is just wonderful. Hazlitt's such a great writer. Okay, then we have the single most important book written by an individual author as opposed to a team of people ever in the history of the human race. That is The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Lovely Penguin Classic edition here. Minimal notes. It reads wonderfully. It reads just as immediately as it did in 1859. So you don't really need a whole bunch of notes. You really just need to read it with proper appreciation. It's actually more readable than most seminal scientific masterpieces are. And reading it for that, you'll enjoy it, but you'll also be aware the whole time of what a large number of readers were aware of when this first appeared, which is that it changed the whole world. The whole world is different now. There is now effectively a way of understanding reality that does not involve gods or goblins or angels of any kind. There's a way of understanding reality now that doesn't reduce to not just the supernatural, but the supernatural that I, a priest, who I want you to maintain. I'm not going to work for a living. I want you to maintain me. I'm telling you what that supernatural reality is like. I'm not leaving you to find out on your own. I'm telling you what it's like. And I'm telling you whether it likes or dislikes what you're doing on any given day, at any given moment. This was the breaking of that shackle. This was a worldview that didn't require anything like that to work. Okay, here's a figure that we saw on this channel just recently. This is Lafcadio Hearn, finally made it into Penguin Classics with his Japanese ghost stories. Very good volume, very chilling. Actually have the pub sheet in here. When did this come out? 2019, so we would have seen this together. Then we have another, it's a very slim book, but it would be on the same shelf as Origin of Species in terms of a book that had an absolutely seismic impact on the world. No book equals Darwin for that, but this one comes close. This is Common Sense by Thomas Paine, that is as responsible as anything else for the fact that America exists as a country. And talk about ringing. I've often told people, or advised people, if you want to read Common Sense, read it out loud. Just set a space aside, let everybody know that, or go somewhere out in a park or a field or something and read it out loud. That you really won't get its incendiary cadences unless you do that. Okay, then we have George Eliot. This is Selected Essays and Poems. Very, very treasured Penguin volume of mine. I go back to this a lot. It technically doesn't belong here because I have a section in another room for books about books and books of literary criticism and whatnot, which is a large amount of this book. but it's a Penguin Classic, and you don't break those up. And Eliot was great at this sort of thing. Not known for it, but great. And it paid her bills for a large chunk of her writing career. Okay, well, we're so close with this one. Oh, we're so close. This is Howard's End by E.M. Forster, not Morris. Morris is here somewhere. This is Howard's End, E.M. Forster's masterpiece, and a great novel about, as one book jacket put it years and years ago, who will inherit England? We don't know the answer to that. Oh, great. Okay. This is fantastic. This is Robert Latham. This is the shorter Pepys, which you might think is ironic because it's a big book, but we're talking about Samuel Pepys here, who kept a diary for 10 years, and the diary is amazing. Just amazing reading. Totally X-ray clear view of himself, his people, and his world. Doesn't read like he thought that anyone was reading over his shoulder, which I've hardly ever known a diary keeper who didn't write that way. They just do it automatically. They write as if someone is reading over their shoulder. He does not write that way in his diary, which is why it's so incredibly spellbinding to read, but it's huge. And so it has spawned abbreviations. We've seen one already. We saw an abridgment already, the Everybody's Pepys. This is a very generous, big selection from the Diaries of Pepys. Those selections are, I would rail against editorial interference, but they're not hard to make. When it comes to Pepys's diary, they're not hard to make. If your library, for instance, or your school library has an unabridged Pepys, you'll see right away. Just pick one volume and start paging through it. You'll see right away that a huge number of entries in the diary can simply be left out. They're of interest only to historians of minutiae, historians of minutiae, whereas the bigger, more narrative, more personally interesting entries, they don't fill a book much bigger than this. This is about as good as you would want. Then we have William Dean Howells. This is The Rise of Silas Lapham, his masterpiece. But we also have a modern instance. There's a little girl feeding sparrows on Boston Common. That is Tremont Street in the background there, and this is the Common, and the sunset that has just happened is perfectly captured there. And also Hazard of New Fortunes. So we have, and does the Hazard of New Fortunes has the famous Adam Gopnik piece from 2000, from the year 2000. He did a piece on that suddenly had, for a brief flurry, it had people in Manhattan and parts west wondering if maybe they should read William Dean Howells. It didn't last long, but still. Then we have one of my favorite books, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is a pretty strong Penguin Classic shelf. Actually, there aren't many duds here so far. This is Jules Verne's quintessential adventure masterpiece with Captain Nemo. Another book I really love. This is Roger Guard's translation of The Red and the Black, The Scarlet and the Black by Stendhal. Fantastic, moving novel, just gripping. I don't have a big fat thing. What is this? Oh, this is a very pretty thing. This is edited by Patrick Crotty, and this is the Penguin book of Irish poetry. Big fat thing. Full of, this is an introduction by Seamus Heaney, and it's really well chosen stuff. It just takes you through 1,000 years of Irish poetry. Oh boy. Okay, this shelf is Steve's favorites. I guess that's the whole point, right? I once had a whole wall of Penguin Classics, and it was full of doubles, triples, quadruples, full of the whole works, everything ever that Penguin ever published by 6 or 7 authors that I don't like at all. I just had their books because they were Penguin Classics. And I decided one day to just get rid of that, go through that wall and keep the ones I like, and get rid of the ones I don't. I shouldn't, under any circumstances, have in my collection books I don't like. Just because they're published by Penguin? How absurd. So I did that. And that might account for the strength of the bench here. This is The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. There he is. That's the Quentin Matisse portrait. This is translated by Betty Radis, and this is the last translation that this book has had, as far as I know, or maybe there's one other from One World Classics, but it's largely fallen away from the popular reading public, and that's too bad, because once you know the context of what Erasmus is writing about, the abuses in the church, the venality of the church, this is every bit as alive as it was. It's just, and those venalities have not gone away at all. If you watch YouTube, there are tons and tons of YouTube channels dedicated to the YouTube channels of these fraudulent Christian mega church fraudsters, just fraud factories. And there is also a healthy strata of YouTube of channels solely devoted to calling out those frauds. They are very Erasmusian channels, except they have no humor. Except for one. There's one channel, a married couple, the Kozars, who have one of those church watch channels. I don't remember what the name of it is. It doesn't have a good channel name. I think it's the Crazy Church or something like that. And when they have a feature on their channel called Hit the Bar. And it's not because they're heavy drinkers. It's because they have on screen some mega church service of some kind or other, and they hit the pause bar every time one of them has some sort of interruption to make on how dumb this stuff is. And those videos, they have their dogs with them, and those can be very funny. But most of them are deadly serious in calling out all of the abuses that Erasmus talked about. Not the exact same abuses, not with 80 different heads of St. James or whatever that are holy relics, but the same kind. It's the same. It's made to do the same thing. It's meant to bilk people of money. Okay, then we have Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Marble Fawn. This is not, I almost said The Scarlet Letter, but I don't see any other Hawthorne here. I have all of Hawthorne and Penguin, but not on this shelf, not with The Marble Fawn. Maybe that indicates that that I'd only recently reread The Marble Fawn. And there was an edition of this book. This is a terrific, weird, sensual Hawthorne novel. And there was an edition of it that came out over 100 years ago. Had tipped in photos, and you had to cut the pages. The paper was really thick, worsted stuff. And I had that edition. 15 years ago, I found a copy at the Brattle. I have no idea what became of it. I don't have it anymore. That is, when I talk about, backstop editions, that is the edition that I would want of this thing. I'm sure it will turn up again at the Brattle. I just hasn't yet. Let's see here. This next one's big. Oh, okay. This is Selected Poems and Prose of Percy Bysshe Shelley. Painting there. The painting is the Mont Blanc Massif. And I'd be willing to bet you a Boston cream pie that doesn't look that way anymore. But this is a lot of Shelley. This is a big, thick thing. It's meant to be all of Penguin Shelley that they're going to do. Then we have Washington Irving. Look at that. Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Other Stories. With the Headless Horseman there. I love Washington Irving. Wish that Penguin did a lot more Washington Irving. Oh, okay. And then we have basically the same thing, only without the marketing people getting involved. Because this is the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. And this is the same thing. It's the same collection of stories. Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow will be in here. It's just, I guess it's not... Penguin decided in one case to just call it The Legend of Sleepy Hollow so that people would know what they were getting, and in the other case to be more literal, more accurate. Then we have a beat-up trade paperback. Boy, oh boy, I go back to this. We have a beat-up trade paperback of Jane Eyre. I just reinforced that it doesn't have the floppy Penguin binding, but it's still, this will take many, many, many rereads. And it is a perfect example of how I'm always on the lookout for a really good, nice, interesting hardcover edition of Jane Eyre to go on the classic shelf behind me rather than on the Penguin shelf. Just haven't found one. That's all. Oh, whereas in this is an example of the opposite. This is A Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. And I do have a big hardcover edition of this that's in this room. We'll be getting to it on this library tour. But they made that edition. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same edition. They made it into this Penguin Classic. So I got both, because the fact that I have a backstop doesn't mean that I don't want the book. I do still want. I still want both. I'm not saying that once I find an interesting hardcover edition of whatever classic that I will get rid of my Penguin Classic. I'm not saying that at all. No, I have both. So there you go. That was the our next library shelf tour is still Penguin Classics. We'll be moving on tomorrow, more Penguin Classics. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.